Hello, this is our Rats with Team 4545 League at ICC, analyzing a game in the playoffs, round 2, team event number 52. This is between Loudon and Barbuck. It's a pretty entertaining game. As usual, I will try to find out what the mistakes are and open up the discussion. And let's hope that we get some discussion from the players on this one. All right, here we go. All right, Caro-Kann. Now, is it going to be an exchange or a Panov attack? We'll find out in a moment. It's a Panov attack. Okay, I don't know all the theory on this. I really don't. That's not important. What I know, what's important is what you learn and apply what you know. All right. Generally, what often happens is white accepts an isolated d-pawn in exchange for a lot of open lines and some rapid development. Black, on the other hand, should also get quickly developed and try to take advantage of the fact that white is left with that isolated d-pawn. Okay, so far it looks pretty booked to me. Okay, now black's got the knight on the ideal square, blockading the isolated pawn, but there's still a lot of chess to be played. Okay, queen b3, double little threat on the knight on d5 and the pawn on b7. I'm assuming this is still booked. Both players are playing pretty quickly, and they did both take their time in this game, so I'm assuming this is all still theory. Okay, so the objective of black's last move was to cripple the white pawns. These pawns aren't going to be all that valuable in the endgame, so if theory is still playing this move, it's probably good for equality. So this means at some point black is going to go wrong because eventually he's going to lose this game. So the threats still remain on the knight on d5 and the pawn on b7. Let's consider some possibilities. Could black sacrifice the pawn on b7? Maybe. One way to try that might be e6. I don't know if that's any good because, you know, you're giving up a pawn. You will have some counter on the pawn on d4. But then again, let's see. Let's just give an idea. E6. Now let's see. If white plays queen takes b7, he's attacking c7, so that may not be all that bad. And the alternative is, if you don't want this knight doing a few nasty things like running into b4 at some point, might be to just take on d5. And again, I don't know if this is theory. This is just an idea. And if white trades queens, the game is even, I would assume. He can take on b7, and then black's going to get his pawn back here. White will have the two bishops, but as I said, his kingside pawns are all messed up. So I don't know, it's just an idea. It might be playable. These are things to consider when you're playing the game. See, I want everyone to understand one thing. Book is just book. It's usually 99% or higher a record of games that have already been played. It's rare to find an author that will suggest, what about this move? What about that move? Well, we don't know if the moves I've suggested are good until we either play them and find out why they're good or not, or we analyze them and say, wow, this is good. I can't wait to play it. Okay, so let's just go back to the main line and move on with the discussion because there's quite a lot of ground to cover. Okay, now this is generally a good idea for white. If he can push that d4 isolated pawn up to d5, it will cramp the black game quite a bit. Clearly, we can see that black is going to have little trouble pushing e6, getting that bishop out, because he's just going to be, well, in this case, he'd be losing a pawn on e6. Of course, he has to deal with the knight first, but but let's see what he does. Okay, comes in with an attack, and with the clock as they are, I'm thinking this is still book. Okay. Now black needs to get developed at some point, and here he's offering that b7 pawn to do so, and soon enough white's going to take it. But at the same time, white doesn't really have a lot of development here. His king isn't castled, and although black may not be able to get to it easily if he castles short, the queen bishop and queen rook are still out of play. So white needs some development here, and he picks it. And black needs some development also, and then white applies a little pressure on the open file, and black castles. He's letting white have that b7 pawn, so he said, now's the time for you to take it, but I'm going to be developed. And white goes and develops a piece and makes another threat. And I don't know if this is book, but here's a point that I'd like to say, that maybe black didn't play the best move. My point being, his choice to recapture with the pawn, although it secures that pawn from possible threat later, it allows this d5 pawn to be a pass pawn. So maybe more prudent is to just take with the knight. Now, yes, white can get some pressure on e7. He can take a pawn and be attacking on e7, but black has some resources. He can sit with rook e8, then chase the queen out, and very likely win that pawn on d5, and it result in a position where white would have a 2-to-1 majority on the queen side, and black would have a 4-to-3 majority on the king side. And I would expect, with careful play, black shouldn't lose that. Okay, he took with the pawn, and as I said, the long-term drawback is that pawn on d5. Okay. Now, both pawns are now gone, but that's alright. We're going to get one back here in a minute. Or are we? Well, yeah, he's got a threat on f3, so white deals with that. And now, black has gambited a pawn for this position. Really, does black have winning chances? Hardly. He's going to have to generate an attack here to try to justify it to win, and the queen can't conveniently get into play. If you push f5, the knight on to open up a diagonal, the knight is loose. So what black is going to have to do to draw this is gain his pawn back and win probably the pawn on d5 or the pawn on a2. So that's going to be the black theme for the rest of the game. And as it turns out, he was never able to do that, and white finally consolidated his position and achieved something winning. So now black offers a queen trade, and white obliges. Development is just about even. Black's got some open lines, but white has a couple of pass pawns, and maybe black can set up some kind of a blockade where white can't push them by, then get his king activated and help out and finally surround and win one of those pawns. Because I would expect if you win either of those pawns, it's most likely going to be a draw. But let's see what happens. Well, white puts his a pawn in action, and black puts his rook behind the pawn, or in front of the pawn, I should say. Okay, then black sends the knight over to the queen's side where it's needed with tempo. Now the knight has an option of going back to d6, which is a very nice blockading square. You always want knights blockading pawns, especially pass pawns. Okay, so white throws a rook to the 7th. That's as aggressive a square as any. And black chases him away. White stays on the 7th. And boom, black has achieved that one aim of blockading the pass pawn. So we just have to hold the rook pawn down, or the a pawn, and black can probably get a draw here. we're close to getting a blockade. So let's see how white handles it. Well, he threatens to double his rooks on the 7th rank, although is that really much of a problem? It might be. The knight is holding f7, so maybe a tactic in mind of at some point knight b5 and to deflect the knight. So white goes in, or black goes and puts a little pressure on that knight. There it is, knight b5. So black finds another good square for his knight. Not yet. He will. Okay, offers a rook trade. White refuses. Okay, another great square for knight. Once again, blockading a pawn. It's not a pass pawn, but that knight is going to sit there pretty much as long as black wants it there. And perhaps him moving it soon is an error. We'll discuss that when we get there. Okay, then there we're there. So let's just for a moment reflect on this and think about this. The white pawn on d5 is threatening to run. So what if black plays rook d8? That just threatens to take it. White's going to have to deal with that. Okay, so he can do that in more than one way. He can play rook ed1. Then white can go attack the other pawn with rook b4. It just kind of helps it up the board, but then you stick the rook behind it. So let's just look. Again, I don't know if this is forced. It's just the first thought that crosses my mind. Okay, now we attack it. Now, if white goes rook a7, he's blocking the pawn's advance, so maybe he's going to play here. And now maybe he has to. And now let's go chase the knight again. Why not? Okay, well, you could go here, and then maybe black comes back and blockades here. And so I don't know how what the evaluation on this position is. It's just an idea. Keeping the knight on good squares can't be a bad idea. It would be up to white to prove that he has enough positional compensation to overtake that. But it's a plan for black. Keep your knight on good squares. So should black be playing for a win here? Unless he can get a mate, it's probably not a good idea. So that could have been black's mistake. Now there's a threat on the pawn, and white actually allows it. But if you take it, the knight's going to get out of play real quick. Knight takes h2, check, king g2, knight g4, and that knight's not getting back into play too quickly. It could go to h6 and back to f5 again. But then that passed h-pawn is a long way from being a threat, so maybe this is an indication that black shouldn't have gone the way he did. Okay, let's see what happens. Now suddenly white has a threat, take on f7, and black says, go ahead, I'll checkmate you in a moment. But white says, I'll just get rid of the rook. Now I'll chase the knight, and white says, well, you take my knight, I'll take yours. And maybe here was a place to play knight f5 rather than rook b4. Now d6 check, and if the king goes to d7, f6 falls with check. It's getting kind of messy here. Okay, now the knight finds another good square to go to, and then black brings his knight back. Now he's got it back on the ideal square, but a couple of things have changed. The white pawn is just a little more advanced now than it was before. The white knight is stronger. The black king position is kind of weak here. So the threat on f4 is not really much of a threat at all because white's trying to find a way to break in here. Let's move on. a5. There goes the pawn. Rook d5. Now there's threat of knight e6 check, winning the rook, and white gives it, or black gives a check, and kind of black's just shuffling, and then black forfeited on time here. Looks pretty strong for white. The pawns look almost impossible to stop. So there's the game. I gave some ideas. Hopefully the players see this and expand. All right. Thanks so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed my analysis. Thank you.